Happy Friday, everyone. Josh's Severe Weather. Hope you all have had a wonderful week. We've got ourselves a pretty serious situation setting up here in the high plains. I'm also going to talk some about what's going on with the tropical depression in the Gulf of Mexico and what's to come for this weekend. So, a lot on the table here in the weather business here in the United States and Canada as well. I'm going to share my screen with you guys and show you this urgent threat that we're looking at, not just for damaging storms, but flash flooding is going to be a huge problem. And I know there's going to be a lot of storm chasers out here. We've got a lot of roads closed, and the situation looks like it's actually going to get worse, unfortunately, with a moderate risk for flooding and an enhanced risk for severe weather. And I'm particularly concerned about the area between Lubbock and Midland, Texas. But there are many other places that are going to get hit here hard later today into tonight with lots of rain, lots of wind, maybe even some tornadoes. Right now, we've got on our map several areas that are under flash flood watches. Parts of northwestern Texas, southwest Oklahoma, eastern New Mexico, as well as a good chunk of Wyoming and eastern Montana, parts of Idaho and Nebraska, and of course South Florida also under a flash flood watch with tropical moisture somewhat associated with our tropical depression. And you can see two pretty big areas here that we're concerned with excessive rainfall, maybe some major rain. And you know, this area was in a drought here in the last couple of months. We're completely flipping it here into a very wet start to the summer. And some of that is a product of the big flip we're seeing coming out of La Nina and going into an El Nino. That transition is leading to some excessive weather for some. And this is obviously not great for our agricultural friends. It's probably going to hit our wallets hard here this summer into the fall. So obviously, I'm going to stick to the weather, but I want you to be aware of, be aware of what kind of effects this is going to have. We do have roads closed south of Lubbock, Texas, around La Mesa and Tahoma and over to Post, Highway 380, as well as Highway 87 and Texas State Road 137. Unfortunately, I don't see the situation improving much today as we have additional storms in the forecast. We have an enhanced risk, which covers a pretty big amount of real estate here from between Amarillo and Lubbock all the way south of I-10 towards the Big Bend region of Texas, east of the Trans-Pecos. There is a 5% chance for some tornadoes in this area. I would not be shocked if one or two of them ended up being a strong tornado. That would be later this afternoon. There's also a pretty big threat for severe winds with wind gusts likely over 74 miles per hour with some of these storms over West Texas, and a pretty big hail threat as well. Maybe we'll see 2 to 3 inch hail in some of these storms. Tomorrow, the threat for severe weather does lower some, but the area grows and expands eastward towards Dallas-Fort Worth, maybe Waco, Texas. It's more of a marginal risk at that point, mainly strong winds and hail. There'll be heavy rain, though, so expect stormy weather this weekend farther east in Texas. And then the threat for severe weather on Sunday is starting to wane. We'll still have some rain in the forecast for some, but nothing like today. Here's a look at the NAM model from weatherbell.com. You can see circulation here over western Colorado. That is spinning a lot of moisture into the Rockies and the high plains. And as the afternoon wears on, this is 4 o'clock Eastern, 3 Central. You can see a big blow up of storms, another blob here going. And in fact, this entire storm system is going to trigger storms all the way up into parts of Manitoba, North Dakota, and Minnesota, where the heat has been on here over the last few days. But the area of greatest concern right now is West Texas, and that will expand into southwest Oklahoma this evening. We also have concerns about heavy rain over central and eastern Montana, which could shut down some of the major thoroughfares that trucks need to take here to get supplies from the west to the Midwest. So definitely not a far-fetched idea that we've got ourselves a pretty big weather disaster in the making. It's not going to impact a large population of America, but it is going to have a lot of impact on how our economy goes here, I think. You know, and I'm not an economist, but certainly these areas are big thoroughfares for trucks. I-20, I-10 in Texas, I-90 in Montana and North Dakota, obviously areas to watch out for. This weekend stays pretty busy, although that threat for heavy rain does shift a little bit farther into the east. And then as we get to Sunday, we'll see more storms coming down from Canada into the Great Lakes region. Here's a close-up look at West Texas. This is where initially things are going to get really nasty around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, so mountain time, that's lunchtime, right around Pecos, Texas, and then expanding northeast towards Hobbs, New Mexico, Midland, Texas, big screen, and eventually getting to post once again. We've got a threat for damaging storms here in that 4 to 6 o'clock time frame. I'm going to pull up a sounding here just to show you guys kind of what it looks like aloft, and you can see winds at the surface are pretty strong out of the southeast, and then over elevational. As we rise with height, that's what I was trying to say, they shift to southerly and then southwesterly. So there's definitely building wind shear in here, and that's why I think there's going to be a tornado threat as the afternoon wears on. There's also going to be very big hail. If you pull up a sounding here from the I-10 corridor southwest of San Angelo, you can see very steep lapse rates. This is where the temperature quickly drops aloft. Yes, there is a threat for tornadoes, but I think there'll be intense hail from any of these storm cells that move through the area. So really not a great forecast at all for you in West Texas. These storms are going to fade after about midnight or so, but obviously we're going to see a lot of rain across this region and certainly a lot of severe weather. Shifting northward, this is where the heavy rain threat is climbing. Amarillo to Lubbock, so that entire region is under the gun for a lot of rain and a lot of severe weather later this afternoon. As the night wears on, the threat for flooding shifts east of this area, but could still exist between Lubbock and Childress and on I-40 between Amarillo and Elk City, Oklahoma. By the time the storms get to Lawton and Oklahoma City overnight, they should weaken. There could still be quite a bit of lightning and certainly some heavy rain. But the overall severe weather threat is going to lessen. And then we'll have some more rain across the same spots here tomorrow morning, with additional storms expected to move onto the Texas Panhandle in the evening. So Montana, on the other hand, got a really nasty setup here. A lot of what we call upglide, where the moisture comes up the Continental Divide from the east. And this can set up a big flash flood for some folks here across central Montana between Billings and Great Falls. So expect to see some road closures across this area. I know there's vacationers heading to Yellowstone that are going to have to go through that area. Total amounts of rainfall over the next 48 hours are pretty high across a large area here, 1 to 3 inches widespread. But if you look a little closer, some of the same spots that have been getting hit hard could see in excess of 2 to 3 inches of rain, maybe even 4 or 5. Some spots in the last 2 weeks are going to pick up a couple feet of rain if this continues. And that's obviously a big concern. When you get farther to the east, those amounts could be heavy, but a lesser area is expected to see that amount of widespread heavy rain. Zooming in closer here, the area into the moderate risk of flooding, and I'll just take it all the way out here till tomorrow night. You can see 2 to 3 inches around Amarillo, so I-40 is going to have some heavy rain issues. Rivers are already high here. We've already seen high water rescues. Lubbock around 2 inches, maybe even more. Farther east of Lubbock, potentially 4 to 5 inches of rain. Childress, a couple of inches are possible. You get farther east and those amounts do come down. In Montana, we also see some pretty major amounts of rain north of Billings and east of Great Falls. We see just on the HRRR model in the next 2 days, the potential for up to a foot of rain here, 10 or 11 inches. So very significant amounts of rain across this area. Parts of Wyoming are going to see a few inches as well. South of Billings, maybe 4 inches. So Interstate 90 could have some flash flood issues. Same with 94 here. Also going up I-15, we may have some potential travel hazards coming. So let's shift gears here to the tropics. This is Tropical Depression 2. We never really had Depression 1, but there was an unnamed subtropical storm off the Atlantic, and maybe it's possible the storm we had last weekend might end up being named as well posthumously. I'm not sure, or at least given a subtropical cyclone moniker. Nonetheless, what we've got here is a system that had a small window to become Tropical Storm Arlene, and it looks like the likelihood of that continuing to strengthen is now starting to fade. And as we get towards the weekend and this storm actually gets pushed southward, which is a shift from a few days ago when it looks like it was going to cross Florida, but as it comes down towards Cuba and maybe survives in here, it's going to be a remnant low. So not a really big deal at this point. I mean, yeah, it's something to talk about, but you can see here's this trough digging into the northeast, a big ridge up here that's going to get squashed. And that's going to generally lead to a northerly flow over this cyclone. You can also see fast winds out of the northwest here on our water vapor imagery. And as the storm goes southward, it's going to encounter that higher wind shear. And that's going to basically lead to the storms being sheared away from the center. You can kind of see the center here. And let me pull up my, I'm going to annotate this for you guys. Let me get you a better color so you can see. Here's actually the center of the storm right now. Here's all the thunderstorms around to the north and east. It's not the best color, is it? Let's do orange. But here's your storm center, and it's actually going to track in this direction. And wind shear coming out of the northwest is going to eventually kill things off. So we're not looking at a real big deal, but it just goes to show you how quickly things could get going and could fade here as we're in an El Nino, or at least heading that direction here for the tropical season. You can see the wind shear increases quickly. All the severe weather in Texas, the jet stream energy from that is going to hit the Gulf here this weekend and come across Florida. And that is going to continue to take the thunderstorm tops off of our depression, blow them off to the east, and should kill off any chance of redevelopment here over the weekend. And then next week, very fast wind flow aloft over Florida. So if this were severe weather season down south, we'd be having problems. But now we're in tropical season and we're not. But we are going to still see a lot of moisture being spread onto the Florida Peninsula that could lead to some heavy rainfall. Here's the surface low with our tropical depression. This is this afternoon on the GFS. You can see pressures start slowly climbing here tomorrow to 1,005. And then as we get towards the weekend, we kind of lose this feature here. It'll still be around, but it's not going to be a weather maker at that point. And then it's already east of Florida by Tuesday. So unlike a few days ago when it looked like this could try to become a system out here, it's actually become a cyclone here briefly and will likely diminish as we get towards Sunday. Here's where the models ensembles take the storm center. This is, of course, assuming a circulation holds together, but it'll escape the Gulf probably without being a tropical storm, so no watches or warnings for Cuba at this point. As it gets out in here, there's a small window where it could try to become a depression again towards Bermuda, but really just a rainmaker at that point. Bermuda's already getting a heavy rainmaker today, so this is not going to make things any better. The ensembles show our probability for a tropical storm is pretty low today, about 10%, and then as we get to the weekend, no longer do we see that threat, and no additional threats over the coming week that I can see. This is the tropical depression probabilities for winds that are 30 miles per hour. From the Canadian ensembles, you can see tomorrow it's already starting to fade, and then we get to Sunday and Monday, and that chance has pretty much diminished. So not really a big deal. It's a good exercise for the hurricane hunters, for the National Hurricane Center to keep them on their toes. But fortunately, this is not going to be a hugely impactful system for a lot of folks, other than it's kicking up rainfall over the Florida Peninsula. And honestly, Florida's seen a lot of the heavier rain before this thing even became a named depression yesterday. Wind speeds are going to be coming down after 24 hours. We see very few models showing it getting to tropical storm force at this point. It may have actually gotten there briefly yesterday before the plane got in there, but the trend is now already for some weakening due to that wind shear. And so not really a big deal at this point. I'll come back to that in just a second. Here's the radar forecast. And you can see the concentration of storms tonight starts falling apart. This is tomorrow morning. The center is between almost into the Yucatan Channel, which has to be watched for the warm loop current. But the wind shear here wins out, and we just don't really have much of an organized system. We have moisture coming into Cuba and Florida over the weekend and early next week. Some heavy rain into the Bahamas as well as we get into Monday and Tuesday, but not really a closed circulation. Here's total rainfall, excuse me, over the peninsula. The Everglades could get hit pretty hard, maybe up to a foot of rain in here. The East Coast on the NAM model is not seeing as much rain, but I would not be shocked if we did have some heavier rain here. Western Florida, though, Lakeland, Bradenton, some of those areas, maybe even Tampa Bay, could pick up a couple inches of rain, as could the East Coast of Florida as well. And so that's kind of where we're at. Here's a quick look at the Nino 3.4 index. La Nina is when the values are 0.5 or lower, below average. We came out of that here over the spring. El Nino is when they're above 0.5 average. So we're beginning an El Nino now. You can see the latest value continues to climb. And obviously, I'm watching this trend closely, but the numbers will fluctuate from day to day. We really need to see a longer term trend of maybe 30 days before we see this officially becoming an El Nino. If this trend does level off, this does not necessarily mean the Atlantic hurricane season is going to be just completely quiet, where we just have a few storms that don't impact land. If the number continues climbing quickly, though, the chances for us to see below average activity do start climbing as we get to the second half of the season. But it takes some time for things to respond. And just because the Pacific is warming quickly doesn't mean the Atlantic is going to cool, or that the wind shear is going to very quickly ramp up. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It means over the larger scale that could certainly be the case, but we don't just automatically see things shutting off here. It's not like a light switch. You flick it on and off. However, this could have major ramifications come this fall and winter for what we see. All right, so in the east, we've got a big front coming down. That's going to break up the heat across New England. It's going to be a hot day in the northeast, so expect storms this afternoon in New England, and then moving southward tonight across New York, and then fading. Additional storms popping up on our boundary here tomorrow afternoon. Not a washout of a weekend, but we keep the string going of potential rain in the forecast this weekend over parts of Virginia and North Carolina. And we could see these storms around 6, 7 o'clock approaching the Triangle and Triad tomorrow, but they're going to be moving pretty quickly. And then much cooler weather on Sunday. That front Sunday can be tracked all the way through South Georgia and North Florida. It's starting to fade. We'll also have a coastal low getting going. But the trends for this coastal low have shifted farther east, meaning the heavier rain is probably going to stay off the coast in New England. It'll be cloudy, crappy, and cool, so not a good beach day on Sunday in New England, but right now it looks like the washout remains east. Maybe it clips Nova Scotia. Here's a look at our upper level pattern. Here's our big storm moving onto the plains across New Mexico and Texas. Here's our upper level low, and you can see the wind shear increasing here coming into the Gulf. But this trough continues strengthening, and we've got a pretty cool weekend, especially second half of the weekend over the southeast and the east coast of New England. So we're very quickly cooling off and staying that way next week. Much cooler weather, but we've got a pretty dry flow aloft out of the north that's going to continue to lead to dryness over the Ohio Valley, over parts of Missouri, the Tennessee Valley, and drought conditions, which have started to show up in here, could intensify out of this. You can see the ridge of high pressure builds, and we've got another omega block taking shape here where things are going to move in slow motion. Cooler than average across the southwest, cooler than average across much of the east, hotter than average over central Canada into parts of northern Quebec. And we don't see this pattern really changing a whole lot over the next 10 days. So not really a true summer-like pattern here in the southeast. We have had summer in the northeast, of course. And pretty incredible heat over parts of Canada. Yesterday afternoon, 96 around Montreal. I saw there was a record high of 96 in Millinocket, Maine, 95 in parts of New Brunswick. So I'm in Raleigh. I've not hit 90 yet. I've only gotten to 88. Much of southern New England got to 96, 97 back in April. Now northern New England, southeastern Canada, 96, 97. I'm not jealous. My air conditioner bill is much lower. I appreciate that, but just been kind of a wacky year so far here. We had more record highs in parts of Michigan, lower 90s around Gaylord, upper 80s, low 90s around St. Louis. Actually, that heat builds some today, so we could get up to 93 in St. Louis, 91 in Chicago, 92 here in Lansing, Michigan. Some record heat as well in parts of Ohio. The Northeast is going to see its hottest day in a while, 95 in Philly, 94 in Reading, 87 Mount Pocono, 92 Hartford, 90 in Burlington. So it's going to be a toasty one out there in the Northeast. But look at tomorrow. We go from record heat to record low maximum here. Islip, New York, 61 the high, 56 in Boston. So a huge flip coming. Lower 60s in Maine and 40s in Mount Washington, maybe even 30s. Could see a bit of snow there. But the heat builds here around the Mississippi Valley, 90s in Wisconsin, 95 in St. Louis, still 90 around Chicago, 94 in Peoria. The oven is on preheat here in Arkansas, low 90s, and that starts climbing into the mid 90s in Little Rock on Sunday. The heat builds in Missouri as well. We are going to start cooling off, though, around the Great Lakes region, starting to see those temperatures coming down around Milwaukee. Still toasty, though, around La Crosse, Wisconsin, and Waterloo, Iowa. But look how cool it's going to be on the East Coast. 77 in Raleigh, 77 in Wilmington, 76 in Myrtle. Another beach weekend where if you go outside, you're going to need that blanket on the beach. Just going to be a windy, cool day Sunday. More of the same Monday, but it is going to start heating back up here next week. So we do start to see the heat at least trying to advance back to the Midwest. But look how the Northeast avoids this heat again next week. So a big flip coming in the weather pattern here. And here's what January looked like well into the La Nina. You saw that the Southwest was cooler than average. It was very wet and stormy in California, very snowy as well. It was such a warm month across Canada and the eastern U.S. In January. And as we move this along, let me see if I can get it going here. February, still pretty warm. March, April, and here's the month of May, and everybody who was above average in the East was below average in the month of May, while the Northwest saw a very warm May, and Canada continues to stay warm here, with the exception of March and April, flipping right back to warm. So you can see how quickly things are changing in the larger scale. And I think June is going to remain below average here in the southeast. It'll be above average across the Great Lakes and below average across parts of the west. But we could see another flip back here in July. So be prepared for the flipping and flopping, because that's what you're getting here with this weather. If you enjoyed my video, I really would appreciate if you could subscribe. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I thank you, and I give all the glory to God who gives me the strength to do this every day. The Lord has been with me throughout this journey over the last 6 months, and really before then. I've been a Christian man for over 10 years, and I don't shy away from my faith. I think it's just crucial to what I do every day, and helps me to allow you all to see how the Lord works in me, and I really hope that he's working in you. This month, we're going to hear a lot about the word pride, and I just wanted to read a verse out of Proverbs 11 that the Lord, this is a new international version, the Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Pride comes before the fall. That's basically what that says. Proverbs 16, 16:5, the Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. Through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, evil is avoided. Look, we all have egos. We all have some pride. But the Lord says, if you put yourself before other people, if you put yourself before God, you will go punished. But the good news is that the Lord has sent his son, Jesus Christ, to save us from eternal damnation. That punishment that awaits all of us can be avoided if we accept Jesus Christ as our Savior. And I wanted to share that good word with you, because I struggle with pride. I think we all do at some point. We all want to be right, but knowing that the Lord is the one who gives us that gift of eternal salvation means we take our pride, set it aside, and yield to the Lord, and fear what can happen if we do not trust in him. And so the good news I wanted to say for you all is that the Lord can give you eternal salvation through his son, Jesus Christ. That is promised to us. But the folks that decide that they're not going to choose that are going to continue to be boastful and full of pride. And unfortunately, the ending does not look like it's going to be good for them. So I pray for you that you are a person that chooses to accept the Lord and Jesus Christ. And if you are struggling with anything in your faith or anything in your life, I'm happy to pray for you. And if you could pray for me and my family, I very much appreciate that. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week. We'll chat again in the morning. God bless you, and have a wonderful day. Take care.